Joseph Swetnam says, never stop learning and never stop studying, no matter how old you get, until you come to the grave. And then he says that, oh gosh, my mind's going blank now, but he makes an interesting comment about being an older practitioner. And that, yes, as you get older, your skills decline, but your knowledge is still there. And that your goal, your objective, your responsibility is to pass it on to the next generation and try and make that next generation better than you. And I've taken that to heart. And it's very inspiring because Sir William Hope, who I mentioned earlier, so William Hope says, I'm a master of fence. And you might say to me, how can you possibly be a master? You've never killed anyone in a duel. You've never gone to war. And he says, and this is hilarious, he says, wars do not make one great. It's like, is that where Yoda got it? So he says that, and he's saying it in like 1702 or something. It's very interesting that he stresses that. He says, I have no doubt that I'm a master because I've mastered my craft, mastered my weapon, and I can demonstrate it and I can teach it. And I'm confident I can defend myself in earnest with sharps. In 1789, I think it's 18, in the 1880s, the Japanese samurai Yamamoto Teshu writes a book called The Sword of No Sword. Muto, I think it is. And he says, I'm so good that I can disarm somebody who has a sword and I don't have a sword. And yet I'm using the same moves and methods of sword play to do it. And he gets really good at it. And he's called before the shogun or the emperor to demonstrate his skills. And Teshu is relevant to us because Teshu says, I have reached enlightenment through the path of the sword. I have reached masterhood. And I have never killed a man, and I've never used my sword for real. And if somebody says, how can you be a master when you've never done that? And he's speaking at a time when the samurai are irrelevant, and some of them took to murdering people at the crossroads in order to test their skill and to having had their blades taste blood. A very, psychotic thing. And they're just like, oh, I'm killing peasants. They don't matter. And Teshu says, no. He says, I know I'm a master and I've never killed anyone and I've never been in a real fight, but I have no doubt that I'm a master because when you reach mastery, it is self-affirming. And he's saying the same thing that that William Hope said over 100 years earlier. And I think both those things are relevant to us today because if you're not into sport, and you're into it as a real martial art, whatever your craft, whether it's armed or unarmed, whatever art it is, that still speaks to us, the wisdom of these two guys.
Very good. Thank you very much. Very nice. Very nice. John, do you also teach wrestling in your classes?
I teach unarmed skills, but I don't teach grappling. My facility is not set up for ground grappling. Ground grappling is very destructive on the joints and limbs. I've had 3 members in the last 20 years whose careers were ended because in their study group, some imbecile kicked their leg out from under them or did a leg sweep and ripped their knees apart. I myself had a tendon ripped in Hungary when I was demonstrating in a museum because I called somebody out to demonstrate a technique. And it was a 19-year-old short little guy. And I'm demonstrating a technique, talking to the audience. And he, because he's jujitsu, decides he's going to put a hold on me. And he doesn't even speak English. And he puts me in a hold. And he's never done this hold for real. His instructor apparently never told him, don't do this full on because the effect of the technique is to rip the connective tissue. And he drops me on the concrete of the museum and ripped a tendon. And I was out for 6 months. And to this day, I'm still not 100%. So wrestling and grappling are dangerous. So I follow the philosophy of Fiore. And Fiore says, do not roll around on the ground like pigs and Germans. Ooh, that's rather insulting. But he says, instead, stand upright and throw your man. And his techniques are all about techniques to throw and to do that. George Silver stresses that grappling and wrestling, what he calls grips and seizures, are critical. But his grips and seizures are all about certain locks and trapping actions and things that you do that, are basic self-defense techniques you see in Marozzo in 1536. You see it in Meyer when Meyer's doing certain techniques, but they're not flipping people with hip throws. They're not rolling on the ground. And when you think about it, why would you be on the ground with somebody in an age where everybody carries at least one dagger, sometimes two? Why would you go onto the ground in a back alley or a tavern or a pub? Why would you do it on a battlefield? You wouldn't. So there's a modern obsession in MMA with being on the ground and doing submission holds that is absent in our source literature. But they're saying don't do it.
Absolutely, but John, being a wrestler and a striker as a Kyokushin black belt and a wrestler, I can tell you this, but I'm sure you know that MMA changed. Those days are gone. Nowadays, MMA is striking because everyone knows not to go to the ground. Now, for example, in the past, I was also obsessed. I went to BJJ, but now I said I'm a striker as well. Let's talk on armor. And I'm a wrestler. So now when I do MMA, I don't go to the ground. I stand and strike, right? And though it changed in the beginning, as you know, in MMA times, everyone went to the ground. Yeah. But the last UFC, just watch. Everyone stands, and because they know how not to go to the ground, and when they hit the ground, they stand up. Because they know how to counter it. So we see also a very big change in MMA. Those days which we know that, John, remember, where everyone went to the ground, yeah, are also gone in MMA in today's UFC.
Well,
stands up.
If you look at the early days of the MMA UFC, what happened? They go to the ground and the audience is. And so they're like, okay, all right, because that's boring. The audience wants to see gladiators. They don't want to see wrestling and subtle techniques. But I give a presentation on how the material, the unarmed material in our sources and the associated artwork, combat artwork outside of the sources, all stress three things. This, and this. And those are the three things they don't do in BJJ, they don't do in MMA. And those three things will negate, in my opinion, 70 to 80% of the grappling techniques. When you have as your skill going to the eyes and turning your head and biting anything and instantly grabbing the groin, and when the hand is slapped from the eyes, the other hand goes back. And when he slaps your face away or tries to go to your eyes or pulls something from your teeth, you're at the groin. And when he slaps that hand from the groin, you're back to the eyes. And it's eyes, groin, teeth, eyes, groin, teeth, eyes, groin, teeth. That is what you see in Fior and other sources. And if you attend a women's self-defense class, what are they teaching women? Are they teaching women to do this? Are they teaching women to do this? Nope. They're teaching women eyes, teeth, groin, and then get out of there. So some of our sources are teaching women's self-defense for men. In an age where people have armor and an age where people carry knives and daggers, and they're teaching what you do is you keep him from grabbing you. You keep him from slamming you, and you do it with the eyes, the teeth, the groin, and certain locks. And that's what they're teaching. It's a different context, a different situation. And I've had so many people come to my seminars, workshops, and come to my studio out there and say to me, I'm the state wrestling champ. And I'm like, I don't care. Or I have a black belt in jiu-jitsu and I teach. I'm like, I don't care. Because what you're doing, the context and situation is not what's going on here. And I even said to a professional WWE wrestler who kind of said to me, he goes, yeah, anytime you want to go at it, John. I go, anytime you want a knife fight. And he goes, all right, you got me. So the point was, he knew, yeah, don't knife fight John, and John can't wrestle me. Well, all right, there it is. Because a colleague of mine who used to run the U.S. Army's combatives program, he said, okay, in boot camp, we have all the guys go at it and we have them wrestle. We have them do some MMA stuff and they all think they're badass. And then we turn the lights off and we have two of the drill sergeants secretly hand one person on one side of the room a taser and hand the other one person on the other side of the room a rubber knife. And everybody's got their hands behind their back. Then they turn the lights on and they say, okay, on the count of 5, you're going to go and you're going to do it again. You're all going to clash together and wrestle your opponent. But now they know somebody has a knife and somebody has a taser. And now, instead of charging at each other like they did, they all stay off and they're all doing this. And people have a hand behind their back and they're faking it. Or the guy with the weapons going, yeah, come and get it. Completely changes the entire dynamic when you suspect someone has a weapon. It also has changed if the weapon actually comes out. And so the majority of the material that we see in our sources is concerned with you don't have a knife and he does. And you have to get it from him or keep him from getting it to you. Or he doesn't have a knife and you do, and you're trying to get it into play and he's trying to stop you. Then they move from that to you both have knives, then you both have swords, and so on and so on. One final comment I'll make is that there is, do you know what folk wrestling is? You know the term folk wrestling? Okay, virtually every society has some form of folk wrestling, whether it's West African or Swiss or Turkish or Central Asian, in Kazakhstan or Tajikistan. There's folk wrestling, Mongolian wrestling, and that
in Iran, 22 spots in Iran only.
And the Sussudio in Korea. There's so many folk wrestlings, and folk wrestling, they almost all have certain idiosyncrasies of rules. You can't strike blows. You can't grab the eyes. You can't grab the groin. You can't bite. And the object is for either the soldiers, the warriors, or just the farmers to be able to do a manly thing to demonstrate some strength and not break bones, but to be able to go at it and do something that doesn't involve blows. And we see some of that in our sources. And I think some people see that folk wrestling and they see that it does have self-defense application, but they think that that means that that's the method they're using for self-defense. And it's like, no, that's folk wrestling. That's why they're all smiling as they're doing it, and they're not gouging the eyes and breaking the guy's, elbow and things like that. So, but I'm not interested in the folk wrestling. I'm interested in the unarmed defense against weapons and the unarmed defense against attempts to grapple. And that's the material that I can cover that in a couple of days.
Okay, thank you. And one last question I have, do you teach archery as well? European archery? No. Okay, no archery.
Nope. Yeah, not an archer.
Okay.
I have unbelievable respect for archery. I've seen some of the horse archery, and what they do is scary. It makes me want to drop my sword and just run. But I remind myself that, yeah, you're doing that, for the audience, but do that under fire from somebody else. I want to see you do that trick archery when someone else is shooting at you.
No, most of them, I mean, I do archery, as you know, most of them don't. Trick archery is not war archery. It's only trick. Yeah. Most of those things don't work at all. It's just trick archery. Of course, I fully agree. No,
and then the shooting at a piece of armor that you've placed out there standing still. Yeah, why don't you have that armor moving towards you with a shield, and he's got a spear, and he's going to throw that spear at your horse.
That's the main problem of archery I have, and because I practice archery as well as most of this target archery, they don't do any martial art, they don't do any body contact, and if you just keep shooting at just one thing, this is,
yeah,
just for fun. I fully agree with you. This is different.
I was shooting a crossbow in Mexico at a boar, a piglet. It was piglets they use for cadaver, for medical students to practice surgery on. And seeing how accurate it was, and it was the first time I've ever fired one, and to see how accurate it was, I hit within an inch of where I was aiming, and it was like, and it went so deep. I was just like, wow, that's scary stuff. I mean, there is a reason why the Mongols did what they did. Yeah, it's interesting just to think about where the bow went. In the 1590s, there was a English military strategist who was arguing to the Queen why we shouldn't adopt the muskets and why we should retain the longbow. And he was given all the scientific evidence about range and rate of fire and penetration, but it went away. And it's like, interesting, was it the fear factor? Was it the flame? Was it the smoke? Was it, I don't know. But I attended a presentation where it turned out in the 1760s, a Scottish engineer had developed a repeating rifle. And he developed it, like, I want to say 80 years before it actually comes out. And he demonstrates it for the King of England. And the King of England and his ministers went, oh, that's cute. What an amusing toy. And had he funded the guy to mass produce them, it would have changed the course of the world. They would have won the American Revolution. They would have won the Napoleonic Wars very easily. And it was a fascinating. I mean, he demonstrates this repeating rifle, and they're like, nah, we don't need that. Too expensive to produce. I think it was the lack of the understanding of what they did in the 19th century, where they can produce parts individually. I just make this part, you just make this part. Assembly line production. They didn't have a concept of it. So the idea was one guy would have to make one gun, and it would just be too slow. So fascinating. I think, as you probably know, the studying arms and armor and fencing, it's a blast physically, and it gets you in touch with our forebears, but there's a cultural side to it, and there's a scholarly side to it, and it's something that's missing in a lot of youth today because they're so digitally focused, and they're so into their everything but this. But something that bothers me is we're at a time now in my craft where we have more material to study and more accurate translations than ever before and better equipment than ever before. And what are they doing with it? Turning it into a sport so that everybody's concerned about winning points in front of spectators and judges that, adjudicate regulated, distorted. And they're saying, I don't need to know how Lichtenauer did it. I just need to know what counts as a point. And then they're using weapons that don't function right. And they're doing techniques that would get you killed if you did it in earnest. Or if you took their gloves off and took the mask off, it'd be suicide. And it just makes me shake my head. It's sad. All this knowledge and better equipment, and they want to do it as that.